What's going on, everybody? Got a new kind of video dropping today. It's going to go over the first game I ever memorized. It's the most famous chess game there is. I mean, that's always out for debate, but it really is. If you Google it, most famous chess game, it's the opera game. It was between the strongest player at the time, Paul Morphy. He was an American legend, and two noblemen. I got them written down. The two noblemen were Duke Karl II of Brunswick. He was German, and a French aristocrat, Compte Isouard de Vandergues. Now, the opera was an Italian opera in Paris in 1858. It was over 150 years ago, and it was called Norma, was the name of the opera. And legend has it that Paul Morphy had his back turned to the table. He was playing blindfolded because he didn't travel thousands of miles to see an opera to play a game of chess. And I actually have attempted that twice it's called blindfolded chess. And I did win both games. The second one involved a nice rook sacrifice where they took the bait and delivered checkmate 2 moves later. It's not as hard as it seems. If you look at the board, there's 64 squares. Half of them, 32, have pieces on them. It's not like you have to remember 32 random pieces scattered about. That would be pretty much impossible. There's order to it, and if you ever forget where a piece is, you can always replay the game back. And memory is a big thing in chess. If you don't have a good memory, you can get good, but you're not going to get great. So as I said, I memorized this first time maybe 10 years ago. And I got a couple Paul Morphy games memorized. Well, 3 of them. I would have to brush up on the third one, though. Anywho, let's get this going. Paul Morphy had the white pieces, and the two noblemen had the black. They discussed and moved together. Paul Morphy was an e4 player. Two noblemen matched it with e5. A lot of Paul Morphy's games were the King's Gambit, where black will capture, white will develop, black will come with the queen, king sidesteps, develop, and pieces start flying real quick. Very sharp game. That's not what happened here. Paul Morphy developed knight to f3. Black played d6, and white pushed d4. Philidor defense. Almost like the Scotch game, only the Scotch game would not have d6. It would have knight knight c6 instead. Scotch game is what I play. Scotch game would be this. Anywho, sidetracking a little much over here. So what does Paul Morphy do? Attack the center. Now, the two noblemen made their first weak move by trying to pin the knight. And Paul Morphy attacks the e-pawn. Big mistake would be to recapture, because then queen would come in, black would lose the ability to castle, and since the knight's unpinned, captures the pawn, attacking the bishop, losing more tempo. White is up material, still has the ability to castle, protect his king. It's dominating position for white. So, black captures the knight. Paul Morphy recaptures, eyeing up that f7 square. And before things got out of control, the nobleman recaptured the e-pawn, or the second e-pawn, before he can strike again. Paul Morphy develops his bishop to c4, going for a scholar mate. Both the bishop and the queen are eyeing up f7. If white had an extra turn, he would capture the f7 pawn with his queen, and that would be checkmate. 4-move checkmate, scholar mate. Look it up after. So, black realizes this. They're not rookies, and they block the queen's access to f7 with the knight. If you want to take 3 seconds to guess what Paul Morphy did right here, pause the video. All right, here we go. Queen B3. Getting his pieces back together to attack the F7 pawn again. Now he's threatening bishop take F7 check. So, Nobleman, bring the queen to protect the F7 pawn. Paul Morphy brings in the knight. He could have easily have chopped the B7 pawn, but Paul Morphy was an artist. His games showcased the importance of development, time, sacrifice, combinations in the works. He favored development over material. So he develops the knight instead. Black understands that that's a weak pawn, so he opens up with c6, allowing his queen to protect that b7 pawn now. Queen can no longer take it. Queen's covering it. What does white do here? Pins the knight. Clamping down on the position. What does black do? Attacks the bishop. Realizes that Paul's got a strong grip. Mr. Morphy realizes that that bishop is made out of gold right now. He doesn't want to move it. So what does he do? He sacrifices. He sacrifices a knight. Kills that pawn. Nobleman recapture. Paul Morphy recaptures with check. Now black has a couple options here. Can't block it with the queen. Can't block it with the knight sitting on f6, because then the queen would dive from the dark squared bishop. Black's dark squared bishop's blocked in. Black's dark squared rook is blocked in. He's really only got one more piece to bring into black. Otherwise, he would have to run. And if he ran, then he would just be perpetual check, and it would be game over soon after. So he blocks with the knight. What does Paul Morphy do? Instead of bringing in the rook like that, he castles. Throws a little protection in his king, which is not needed. But he does anyways. It might be needed. And the queen might be able to deliver a check and worm out of something. So, what does the nobleman do? Throw some defense on that knight, because it's being attacked by Paul Morphy's rook and a light squared bishop. Paul Morphy don't care. He takes that rook, or he takes the knight with a rook. Nobleman can't recapture with the knight or queen. Has to take it with the rook. Now that rook is pinned. The knight's pinned, the rook is pinned. The bishop's blocked in. The dark squared rook is blocked in. Position is cramped and clamped. So, what does Paul do? Brings in his last piece. Attacking that rook again. Noblemen realize that they gotta free up that knight, so they undo the pin. Paul Morphy comes in for the kill. Attacks the king and queen with a fork. Can't recapture with the queen, because he would lose it with the rook. What do we do? Takes it with the horsey. And the beautiful finish to this epic game. Queen b8 check. King can't run. The e7 and d8 square covered by the bishop on g5. Has to recapture that queen with the knight. And once he does, it's game over. Rook d8. Checkmate. If you look at the material, black has a queen and a knight more than white. Don't matter. That's why Paul Morphy was a legend. Pieces collaborated excellently, worked together. He was just a mad genius. They say that if he was alive today, that he wouldn't hold up to the modern grandmasters. Bullshit. He'd be number one. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. Especially with the resources today. Dude was just a mad genius. Century ahead of his time. So, as I said, this was the first game I ever memorized. Great game. Opera game. Paul Morphy versus Duke Karl II of Brunswick. And Compte Isouard v. Vandergues. Hope you guys enjoyed this epic game. And it interests you to dig into Mr. Paul Morphy. He's got a lot of games and a lot of stuff to learn from it. Thanks for watching.